Hey, Latoya. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
You gonna be watching Oprah on Monday?
I'm going to be watching Oprah on Monday. I'm not sure.
What do you think of the whole thing? Do you think that's your brother's song? They're saying it's not his.
You know what? I listened to it.
Thank you very much.
It doesn't sound like
It doesn't sound like him?
it. Doesn't.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good night.
Also making news is the controversy surrounding the release of a new Michael Jackson album titled Michael.
This is one of the most controversial music projects ever.
The album many Michael Jackson fans have been waiting for, Michael hit store shelves today.
With 10 never-before-heard songs recorded before his death.
Producer Eddie Casio says Michael recorded some of the songs in Casio's home studio.
He recorded right there in my basement.
But diehard fans aren't buying what Casio has to say.
I just listened to Breaking News, the new Michael Jackson song.
A lot of controversy about this song, and I don't think it's him. I really don't.
Everybody, all the fans, everybody's saying that they don't believe it's Michael.
This song is fake.
That's not Michael's voice.
It doesn't even sound like MJ.
It's not even his voice.
I'm flabbergasted.
It's definitely not Michael Jackson, I guarantee you.
That's not Michael. They can't bullshit me, man. That's not Michael's voice.
That ain't no Michael Jackson.
He does not sound like that.
Controversy is already swirling around the new Michael Jackson CD. Is the pop icon singing on every track?
People are out there trying to decide, is this Michael or is this not Michael?
I can tell you that it is Michael's voice.
Why do you say for sure it is him?
Because you can hear the authenticity in his voice.
Sony's Epic Records guarantees the album's authenticity.
We picked a side. We said it's Michael.
But according to TMZ, Jackson's family says the tracks are fakes, sung by a Michael impersonator.
Welcome back, guys, to part 2 of our Faking Michael discussion with Damien Shields. I'm user 1.5, and I am joined, of course, by user 1 and Damien Shields. We are going to jump right back in. We were having a discussion about the heroes, the villains, and the victims of this podcast. Damien, you were in the middle of telling us who your villains are. Let's continue the conversation with your next villain.
Again, it's obvious. Jason would have to be somewhat of a villain.
It's obvious, Jason.
but the problem is, again, it's just the same thing again. He's a villain who's a victim to some degree. He's trapped under the shadow of this thing. He's a participant in it. It's his voice on the songs. He's essentially pretending to be Michael Jackson, but he's in a position where he can't really, well, he feels he can't really talk about it or, free himself from the shackles of that.
He's contractually obligated.
Yeah, so
like Michael was there.
I think like he's a villain in a lot of people's eyes. Like, people really don't like the fact that Jason would do this and then never come clean about it properly, willingly. But I feel like he's living under the shadow of this all of these years later still. I don't think there would be a day where he doesn't look over his shoulder and wonder if someone's coming to arrest him for singing on the fake Michael Jackson songs. Like, it's got to be a stressful thing for him because he's never been like forthcoming openly and honestly with the truth, which would just set him free. Once he is open and honest about it, I think it would just be he's free. But he has never really wanted to do that. So, yeah, I see him from both sides too, victim and villain for sure.
But don't we all have to take responsibility for the things we've done? Shout out to Oprah Winfrey, a la 1993. Shout out to Oprah.
It would be nice if we did. No one's obliged to take responsibility for anything. It's just, I think,
it's true.
The people that do choose to take responsibility are the ones that we view more favourably. But no one's obliged.
Damien, do you think that he is shocked that people... I know you haven't spoken to him, but do you think that he's shocked that people... I have spoken to him. Oh, you have? Okay, yeah. Do you think that he's shocked that people put 2 and 2 together to realize that it's him? Like, do you think that he thought nobody was ever going to think it was him?
I don't think he even knew that these songs were going to be used this way.
Oh, okay.
Whoa. Okay. Hold on a second.
Because that's a bombshell.
Yeah.
No, that's my thought, because he's never
Right,
disclosed
these are your
one.
opinions, right?
Yeah.
Right, these are your opinions.
It's not a bombshell,
so
it's my
everybody,
thought.
no one go crazy. These are our thoughts and opinions and everything in between, intertwined with some facts, okay? But that's huge, right, that you just said that, because, you know, you are an expert. You may not want to call yourself an expert, but when it comes to this topic, you are an authority on the Michael Jackson album and the fake tracks and the real tracks, right? Because in order to really diagnose these fake tracks, you had to really understand the ones that were actually Michael. You had to do the analysis into that as well, right? Which sometimes I think we forget or we're not talking about, right? It's not just going after those songs that you don't believe are Michael. It's also really digging into the ones that are. I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear you say, hey, I don't think he knew that he would be used in this way, right? And to put him in that space of, you know, as people like to say all the time, humans are not all good and not all bad. That's true, right? And I think when you kind of give these folks dual assignment as victim and villain, it's acknowledging that, maybe from your perspective, acknowledging that fact. So I would love to hear you kind of divulge more into Jason Malachi, who comes across, I think, as very much so Dr. Evil here, and the fact that you think he's maybe not all of that it may seem he is.
Yeah, I just think he does himself no favors by avoiding this subject altogether. I mean, there's no question that it's him singing. It is. It's forensically proven in the podcast, but it's also proven through his own personal admissions in the podcast. And it's him. There's no denying that it is. Talk about it. Tell us how this happened.
Yeah.
Come on, bro. Like, is there a story here to tell? Or did you literally agree to conspire with them and create a collection of fake Michael Jackson songs? I think there's a chance that he didn't. I think that there's a chance that Eddie and James thought this would be a good idea to bring Jason in to sing these songs and had him sign a contract to say that he would never talk about the project, and they chose to use these songs as Michael Jackson songs. But they didn't. I think it's possible that they didn't tell him that they were going to do that. I think it's possible that they told him something else. And I would never put words in Eddie and James's mouth what they did tell him, but I think that there is just that possibility that Jason didn't realize he was going to be used as part of an art forgery. There are any number of possibilities that he could have thought. He could have thought they were doing it for their own personal project to see how these songs would have sounded if Michael really would have sung them. Perhaps they told him, look, we want to do this as a tribute album. Obviously he has died, but they could have told him he wanted to record them. He never got the chance. Would you fulfill the prophecy? You know, bring this to fruition the way that Michael would have wanted. He really wanted to do these songs, but he didn't get a chance, and you're the closest thing. Any number of things that they could have told him that wouldn't necessarily have been, hey, Jason, we've got this idea, and it's
we want to defraud
Michael Jackson
everybody.
songs, and we want to trick Sony, and we want to ruin your life, and like, who knows, right? So it's not just one thing. Like, Jason knew, Jason never admitted it, Jason's a villain.
But Jason was a Michael Jackson. He's a huge Michael Jackson fan. Like, you go into that in the podcast as well.
Yeah.
Like, how much of a fan he is of Michael Jackson's. And so I think that's the part that makes it so hard to wrap your mind around. Like, as a true Michael Jackson fan, how could you do this? But now it makes sense what you just said. Like, I don't think maybe he knew what the end result was going to be when he decided to participate.
And if you sign a contract to say you won't talk about the project, and there's no stipulation in there that, like, P.S. that we may end up using this as a fraud, you're agreeing to not talk about the project. And I think that for him, maybe if that's the case, he signed a contract and he's just unwilling to break it, and he's not talking about it because he said he wouldn't. That could be why he finds himself in this situation and acting the way he does. But I think what he would fail to recognize is that there is no way that a contract is legally binding if it forces you to withhold that you were a participant in a crime. You can't just have, like, hire a hitman and say, here, sign the contract you're going to kill, and then it's like,
I'm never going to talk about the fact that I killed this person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, well,
the police come and arrest you, say, we found the guns, got your fingerprints, we have a video of you doing it.
Sorry,
Can't talk about it. Sign a contract.
I can't confirm nor deny.
So, but, you know, I think to your point, and I think I think those are valid points, right? So Jason, if you're listening to this, Damien has done you a service. He's done you a service. I also think what you do talk about in Faking Michael is the impact and the surge of fan reaction, anger, and hostility towards individuals that certain segments. So the fan community as a whole can identify people as villains or bad actors in different aspects of Michael's life and story, right? But there's a special segment of the fan community that not just identifies this and maybe vocally becomes, objectionable to it, right? And says something, goes online, maybe writes letters, contacts this or does that. There's a segment that will take it a step further that is into potentially criminal land when it comes down to threats against people's life, when it comes down to intimidation, harassment, those sorts of things. And we can't divorce someone's, maybe forbearance from saying certain things from the fact that sometimes fans go too far. Some fans, and I want to be clear because I think the majority of Michael Jackson fans or Taylor Swift fans or Beyonce fans or, these huge artists, they are not fitting in that scope, right? But there are some that do. And Michael is a good example of those that do. Michael famously said in his lifetime, my fans will get you, basically. They will come after you. And I know what he meant by that, but there's also something really disturbing about that because there's a segment of the community that would take Jason and hog tie him, and really...
Who is that segment, though? Because Jason has said that he's received death threats in connection to this.
Yeah.
I don't see why anyone would be so incensed to go that far and do that.
Because you're rational and normal.
But also with Jason claimed that in 2007 when TMZ mistook Mamacita for a Michael Jackson song,
which I don't know,
he was getting death threats about that. Now, there's no reason to have a mistaken identity, a song that sounds, somewhat like Michael, to be mistaken for Michael and then be making you well known for 10 minutes and then forgotten for 3 years until breaking news, that anyone would be in the position to feel that they should threaten your life because TMZ mistook your song for Michael Jackson. But he claimed that they did, that he received death threats over Mamacita.
You're thinking but you're thinking from a rational perspective. And I think when you talk about the quarters of the fan community that may make these threats, it's not a rational space to be in. It's not a coherent and acceptable space to be in.
That's what she's trying to say in legalese. These people are
I'm just saying that there are people that you just made the rational argument, like, why would you do that? They're not rational. So, that leads to this other thing. Also, you're dealing with someone who potentially is, you're trying to hold two things in your hand, right? He's a liar on this hand and maybe a fraud, but also maybe he does fear for himself and his life, and he's not going to come out and say too much because he thinks that a pile of dog shit with the Michael album will sit in his front yard flaming fire with a note, we know what you did. You know what I mean? Like, I know what you did last summer. Y'all got to stop this bullshit. It's some fans out there who would do it, right? Like, I just want to be honest. There are some fans who would do it. I'm not saying that I want to be really clear because there's another conversation in the fan community that is connected to what you have going on here and not. And so I don't want to mix the bag here, but there are, for the most part, Michael Jackson fans are not going to do these sorts of things, right? It's not going to go that far. But there are some where it will go to another space. And I think I just want to give more credence to why maybe he would not feel comfortable being vocal about the truth, right? Because he's afraid, like he may have a genuine fear. That should be underscored by the fact that you have very reputable people, who we would call reputable, who also expressed a fear that you talked about in your podcast of telling the truth or being more forthright. They also said, hey, you're playing with fire. I don't want to play with the fire. And if you want to go out there and do it, you do it. So maybe he, just to give more credibility or to bolster that argument, maybe that's it. And Jason, maybe you need to just come on the Black Jackson State podcast and talk about it.
Jason, now listen, baby. He's not ready for this interrogation right here.
Now listen, baby. He's not ready. We're going to bring Damien. So if you come.
Oh,
yeah, talk to Damien Shields about it. But I think I think you're right. There's a lot to unpack kind of with Jason Malachi's involvement and the extent of what he knew, didn't know, and then when he maybe switches over to being a heel in the story.
Then with lying is that once I know you've lied to me, it's really hard to believe anything else that you've said concerning that particular thing. Sometimes it's hard to believe anything else you say, period.
Yeah, your credibility is fucked.
Him saying that he got death threats over Mamacita, okay, all right, let's take that as fact. Then it doesn't make sense for me. You have a wife and a child, I think. It doesn't make sense for me that you would even go forth with this scheme in 2010 because you know what the community looks like, right? Like, so there are a lot of questions here. I agree with you, Damien. I definitely think he's a villain. I also feel that he falls into the victim category because I don't think he knew what he was getting himself into. I think he saw however many zeros were on the back of that check or whatever he was promised, and he thought, I finally made it as a recording artist, although it's not me credited. So.
Yeah. Well, he did change his mind later down the track about wanting to be credited, and
things got a little weird a little later.
At this point, I mean, the horse is out of the barn. You know what I mean? Like, at this point, you want to be credited. Well, who's going to buy that, Jason? Who's going to buy that?
But you know what's interesting? If in 2010, Eddie Casio and James Port and Jason came forward and said, we wrote these songs for Michael. He did not record them. We've recorded them with Jason. This is the best reflection of how we feel these songs could have sounded if... Just an idea. Like, you know, a what-if thing. It's obviously not Michael. It's not going to sound the way it would have if Michael did it, but it's our best representation. Fans to be able to hear what was possibly in the works and what we were moving towards. And if they would have released it honestly as like that, they would have had people that would have bought it. Because Jason has people that buy his music. Jason has people who buy his music as Jason Malachi, not as Jason Malachi recording the songs that Michael Jackson potentially might have recorded that were written by Michael Jackson's close personal friends and collaborators, right? Like, if they would have just not said it was Michael.
Because I would not have. Would you have bought it, Damien? I would not have bought that.
I'll say LaToya said earlier.
I guess I did buy that.
LaToya said earlier she likes the song Monster. And the way you've got it is with Jason singing it. Right? Yeah. So if you like it with Jason singing it as a fake Michael Jackson song that was created with the sole intention of deceiving you and defrauding you, then you would like it as a non-fraudulent, regular song that was potentially written for Michael Jackson, but he didn't record. So you would still like the song.
Would you buy it? Would you buy it?
You ain't got to buy nothing these days, baby. All you got to do is stream it. We
was LimeWire and everything in 2010 anyway. We was stealing stuff. Absolutely, and I paid for it.
The statute has run on that.
The statute has run. The computer's dead. It has been
all millennials
to death. The computer got every virus under the sun. Okay, but I mean, to your point, right? Maybe some fans would have still bought this, but definitely it wouldn't have been this big thing, right? This big commercial thing.
But it also wouldn't have been negative and controversial and ended up in court. It would have just been somewhat celebratory if it were postured honestly, and you take it or leave it. You either
would you have wanted to even hear Jason Malachi, or would you have wanted to hear Chris Brown and Neo and and Beyonce and whoever else do a tribute? Like, you wouldn't have wanted Jason Malachi.
Anybody, if they had done this with any artist, I think that's what you're saying, Damien, right? Like, not just Jason. If they had done this with any artist and said, these were for Michael, but we have these artists doing a rendering, an interpretation, or whatever, here's the album. I think that's what Damien is saying. Like, it doesn't matter who the singer is. They should have just been honest up front. This is not Michael. This was intended for Michael.
Yeah, but I think it would have mattered who you had singing it, how the public... Now we're talking about the money, the business side. How the public would have consumed it, right? Would we have just LimeWired it? If it's Jason Malachi, I would have. But if you tell me that, that's... The artist is important, right? Which is the point of your whole podcast. The artist is important. Yeah. If you tell me it's Michael Jackson... then oh my goodness, I want to hear it. I expect it to be real ground round. You know what I'm saying? I expect it to be Michael Jackson. And if you tell me it's whoever else, then okay. But like Michael, that's a different story. So that is the essence of the podcast, right? Who do you tell people it is, and how does that then inform their actions and decisions from there? And apparently, if you tell us it's Michael, we're all going to go buy a copy. But you didn't believe if you told us the truth that we would all go buy a copy, because you would have just told us the goddamn truth.
Well, Sony and the estate would have never been part of it and never been. They would have cared.
Yeah,
this would have Jason. Oh, not Jason, but Eddie and James. Port would have never made the bag. They would have never got the bag. They know that. I think and so I'm gonna let because I think are we at the victims? Because I know you're going to get into the splicing of sounds and then the trademarks and all this other crazy stuff that went on.
Yeah, we can end the victims.
Okay. So who are the victims? Who are the victims?
Michael's the victim.
Yeah.
Michael's the victim.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, to the degree that that's undeniable. He spent.
I want my $11.88. Yeah, I want my money back.
Yeah.
Can you write a letter about that? I'd like my money back. Can you send them a
you
letter?
You write the letter this time. You're an attorney. You put your ESQ afterwards, and they might.
It doesn't give me my money back.
You should file an action against them. The album's still being sold.
I want my money. Well, no, we went to the thing, and it was not on the. It was not on the when we went to the show, right, in Vegas. We went to the Michael Jackson store.
In the weeks after the podcast was released, it was still on sale because I had someone who went there, purchased it, and sent me a photo of the receipt.
Where at?
MJ1.
It was on sale with the fake tracks on it?
Yeah, with the 10
When we went
10
there,
tracks.
it wasn't.
Yeah,
when we went there, they were off.
Maybe
they
tidied it up a little bit.
Yeah,
but
also,
it's also on sale in other countries. I've received recently a couple of text messages with photographs.
We're talking about
England.
physical copies.
Yeah, HMV.
Because on iTunes they're removed. Because I just went and listened
Spotify,
the other day.
Digital is all gone.
Their digital is gone. So they said we already printed these other ones.
Well, the thing was that there was no recall. The CD was never recalled. It was just digitally wiped, and then whatever was out in the wild was allowed to remain
out in the wild
until it was sold. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael's definitely a victim. 100%.
Michael's a victim.
Fans are the victim.
He's the victim.
Yeah.
Fans are a victim.
Yeah, fans are victims. The estate and
class
Sony are
action.
victims.
Class action. Yeah. The family, obviously, victims.
Definitely.
You have this dual category that you've identified, and so potentially those are victims. Michael's kids, victims. I want to talk about this just for really briefly and get your thoughts, Damien, because they had just experienced probably, an experience that we can't imagine. You have to have lost a parent at a really young age, and in any sort of way, and it's traumatic. And then for there to be this thing where I imagine you're thinking, I'm gonna get to hear my dad's work, what he's working on. We're gonna hear it in this new album, and then it's not the devastation, the hurt, the anger, all the emotions you can imagine that are going through, preteens.
Well, and let's be clear, some of those 3 songs were not him. There were songs, the other songs on the album, the other 7 songs were Michael. And the first 2 tracks, because I had to look up the original track list, the first Fake Casio doesn't come in until the 3rd track. The first 2 tracks were the Akon song, Hold My Hand, which actually when I first heard it, it brought tears to my eyes because it was just so beautiful and beautifully done. And then Hollywood Tonight is the second one. That's Michael. We know that that's Michael. And then Keep Your Head Up comes in 3rd. So I just want to be clear, not all of the tracks on the Michael album are fake.
Right.
Yeah.
They're all presented as Michael.
Yes.
So, but not all of them are fake. But the kids they're really young, and they are being told, hey, this is your dad. And it's not, and they know it's not. And I just want to get your take on them as a special class of victim in this story.
I think it's really difficult for them. I think the appreciation of the fact that they are victims of this was developed over time. I think, especially with Prince, I think right now he's in a position where he really realizes how much of a victim of this he was. I think at the time that it was all happening, Paris realized that it wasn't him and was fairly upset about it and was shooting off emails and, calling the aunties and the uncles and I can't believe it. But think about yourself at the age of 12, 13. What power did you have to do anything? Your parents say, you can't do something, that's it, you're not doing it. And they were that age, and they were not just surrounded by, everyday adults. They're surrounded by massive, Hollywood lawyers and record executives, and all of these people have a different preference about what's going to unfold here with this stuff than these 13-year-old kids. And so at that point, their voice is going to be silenced very quickly, and the adults aren't even going to give them a chance to speak or be heard. So, but I think that they were so young that it's a shame that they even had to go through it, but I think it would have been a fleeting thing for them. There's some fake songs and it's just terrible, and then it's moving on with life. I've got to go to school. I've got to, live my childhood still. So I think that, financially, because they're beneficiaries of the estate, they were victims that way. This is presented as their dad, but it's not. They're victims that way. I mean, they were kind of dragged into something that no child should be dragged into. This is an adult's world, and these crimes should have been investigated and litigated by adults, but, they're kind of pawns in a argument.
Yeah.
Well, even the kids, dangling them over. Hey, even the kids think it's dangling them. even the kids think it's fake.
Shout out to Janelle Monáe.
That's it.
Shout out to Janelle Monáe. Yeah, no, I mean, like,
I don't think that they should have been dragged into it at all. I think that they weren't needed in this conversation. You know, like you said, Catherine says it's not Michael. That's the end of it. It doesn't go any further.
Story, right? Yeah, and I think Parrish just showed us at a very young age the strength she had and was developing in herself as a young woman. And you saw these kids had to grow up really fast. And they had to start learning how adults really behave really fast. And I also thought that was really an interesting sort of juxtaposition to what Michael talked about a lot in his life. Kids just want to play. They just want to have fun, and his kids did not get that. It wasn't just want to play for them at a very young age. It was, like you said, lawyers and accountants and executives, and is this my dad on this song, or are you, and thieves and liars. And, you know, they were thrust into a very adult world on June 25th, 2009. They were no longer shielded by their father from what he had to experience, and they had to take it on. And this is kind of a perfect example of how they had to take on that burden that he experienced every day of his life as a result of just who he was and what he represented and what he could do for people, right? Ultimately, he could make your life change in an instant. And people at that point, the vultures come, and they had to deal with that very young. And you saw Paris kind of stick her head out, which I thought was really brave for a kid. I remember this part because I remember LaToya, and in Faking Michael, you talk about how LaToya said, hey, my niece is calling me and saying that's not my daddy on these songs. And I just think that, you know,
and we can't let them get away with it.
And we can't let them get away with it. I mean, just the strength of that to come from a very young child, and the courage she had, and Prince as well. And I just really, I mean, I want to give kudos and really give the flowers to Michael's kids who have been champions for his legacy in many ways. I think that sometimes they get criticism for certain things, and maybe it's warranted or whatever, but I think about the burden that was placed on their life really early, and it's really difficult to kind of have a lot of, like, too many sharp edges, right? Like, you can go, you know, you kind of got to give some grace here. I think this is a moment because, you know, like I said, Paris she enters the chat. I mean, she's so young, right? And she's going, this is not my dad. So again, another victim, right, to the story, and one whose voice continues to resonate. She continues to be a voice of support for her dad and what he did in his lifetime and his legacy in music. So user 1.5, I'm going to let you move us forward in this conversation because I'm sure we've got some more things to cover, and also some questions we've got from the Patreon for Damien Shields, and I can't wait to hear his take on some of those things and push us forward here into the conclusion.
Yeah. So before we go, we want to talk about the anatomy of these fake tracks. You spend a lot of time talking about the finger snaps missing, the stomps, the mic bleed, glottal stops. I mean, I learned words I had never heard of before listening to this podcast. I didn't know there was so much that went into forensics, and obviously I'm not an audiologist, I'm not a speech pathologist or anything like that, but there are certain things that people do depending on where they're from and the way they pronounce words. So I want you to talk a little bit about collecting these forensics, and what was it that really, what was your aha moment? Obviously your ear told you this wasn't Michael, right? But once the forensics entered the chat, what was your, like, that's it?
So for me, my biggest aha moment was prior to forensics. It was the vibrato on the songs that had
vibrato.
Not been...
Oh my God, I had to Google it. I was like, what is a vibrato? And why are we listening to this word 15 times? But it was so good. I learned so much about
it's
vibrato.
Important. So the vibrato is like the vibration at the end of the note.
Mm-hmm.
It can be in the middle of the note too. It can be at the end of the note. Typically with a singing voice, it's most commonly the way that the note trails out, and it's the way the voice quivers. But vibrato is heard on violin, on guitar, on many musical instruments. You can include vibrato to increase the intensity or the emotion, how the note that's being played will hit you. And Michael was a master of controlling his vibrato. And as part of the analysis that we had done with the forensic audiologist, he said that he was literally gobsmacked with how incredibly well Michael could control his singing apparatus. That's what the forensic audiologist described it as, that he had extraordinary control of his singing apparatus, and that he could literally have his vibrato in what they call an ideal pacing. Like, he was perfect vibrato. And the songs on the Casio tracks were not perfect, and they were all consistently imperfect. So each Casio track had the same vibrato problems, and those vibrato problems were the same as Jason's vibrato problems. It's not a vibrato problem. It's just Jason's vibrato. That's how his vibrato is. I mean, it only becomes a problem when you're trying to present Jason's vibrato as Michael's.
As Michael,
and it's not the same, and it's obvious, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the biggest aha moment. But I think forensically, just knowing what you hear and knowing that you believe in what you hear and you're strong in your convictions, and then handing over the reins to a forensic audiologist and say, you're the expert on this, like, why don't you do your analysis and come back to us with what you think? And then going, what if they say I'm just crazy? Like, what if they come back and say, look, I studied 39 years of Michael Jackson's vibrato, I studied Jason's vibrato, I studied the Casio's vibrato, and you're wrong, this is Michael. What happens if that happens? And that was a real possibility. Like, I mean, it wasn't possible in the real world because it was never Michael singing on the Casio tracks to begin with. But, you know, if, you know, when it's in the balance and you don't know what someone else is going to say, you think that, you know, anything could happen. And so what the forensic audiologist, Dr. George Papson, did was he did a really detailed study. First of all, he focused in on songs that Michael had recorded in the last decade of his life, because that was the time period in which the Casio tracks were alleged to have been recorded by Michael Jackson. And then so therefore, if we're going to compare the characteristics of the voice on the Casio tracks, they should be relatively time relevant to when Michael supposedly recorded these things. You don't want to do ABC and Stop the Love You Save and compare that voice to something that Michael supposedly recorded in 2007. So he did a study, I think it was 26 or 29 songs, something like that Michael had recorded, and he used demos, so like incomplete songs, fully complete songs, a broad range of different levels of completion, because the Casios started claiming that these were just demos and they weren't the final vocals. And once people started raising questions, they were saying, oh no, it's just demos. But before the questions were raised, they were saying, this is a fully completed album, fully completed songs, release it as it is. You don't need to remix it. We don't need Teddy Riley. We don't need anything. Release it as it is. So they switched. Once the questions came, the excuses came. But the excuses weren't there to begin with. But anyway, with all things considered, Papson took a variety of material and he did an analysis. He did a statistical analysis of the vibrato that Michael Jackson would use on his music when he would sing. And then he did a statistical analysis of all 12 Casio tracks and just compared them. And there was no consistency at all. Like, knowing that I'd heard it and knowing that I could tell that it was Jason and whatever else and tell that it wasn't Michael, like, that's all good and well, but my opinion isn't proof, right? My opinion can't be, it can be used as evidence, but it's not proof. And when you have 1,000 people who have the same opinion, that evidence becomes much stronger. But unless you can actually show, you know, there's some sonic fingerprinting going on here that we can actually demonstrate forensically, it doesn't have as much weight. And the forensics obviously came back that this was a rejection of the hypothesis that it was Michael's voice, so it's not him. And furthermore, which was not part of the requirement of this analysis, was out of interest, he actually went and studied Jason's music too. So it wasn't part of his formal conclusion, because he wasn't actually hired to study Jason and say, does he think it's Jason? But even so, he came back and said, I'm rejecting that it's Michael, but, you know, it's likely to be Jason. But his wording was very careful. He said that it's a less certain conclusion that it's definitely Jason, because he hadn't gone to the full extreme that he did with the Michael analysis. But he said, I have done an analysis. And when I spoke to him and interviewed him, he said, yeah, like, it's clearly Jason. Like, it's Jason. But, like, that wasn't my job to say that it's Jason. So I wasn't so forceful with my conclusion that it was Jason. But, you know, he seemed Well, so that was one of the biggest things, to say that it wasn't Michael singing. But
destroying of the hard drives, and I mean, there's so many things that lead one to believe that somebody didn't want the paper trail to be followed, right? But you came with facts and figures from people who don't have a dog in the fight, right? And so that, I mean, you know, what's the saying? Men lie, women lie, numbers don't. You know, and you came with undeniable, irrefutable evidence that this is not Michael Jackson. It is more likely than not Jason Malachi. And I mean, what else can you say, right? And the twists and turns that the podcast takes to get to this point were just so riveting. Like I said, I didn't know what a Gottle Stop was until I listened to this podcast. But I want to ask you this before we get to the fan questions. Is this the end of the story, Damien? We have 13 episodes of Faking Michael. You have completed and packaged beautifully 14 years of hard work, dedication, and research. Is this the end of the story?
I would hope it's not the end of the story, in the sense that I haven't really reached the audience that I want to reach with the story. So, if the podcast were to blow up and start getting a more widespread listenership, that would be fantastic, and I would welcome that with open arms and be very grateful, because I'm slightly disappointed with the reach that it's had to this point. However, there are other vehicles in order to tell stories, and I'm looking into the possibility of doing it as a documentary. And there's also, it's always been an objective to do it as a book, but it was when podcasting kind of took over the landscape of true crime stories, it was always more suitable to do it as a podcast, but that didn't mean that I didn't want to do it as a book as well. I think that's what I'm pursuing as well. I'll probably do a book version at some point.
Yes, we need a book.
I had always planned to drop the book actually when the podcast would be dropped, but the podcast was released about 3 months before the initial plan, and we kind of rushed it out, and the book kind of just got left kind of in the dust. But it is something I want to do. There's different angles you can take with a different project. Like, for example, there's a lot of context about how different interviews came about, and the story of how it all actually came together has never really been told. So I want to kind of...
We need all of that.
Yeah, I want to kind of dig into, like, there's a little bit of more of my story that hasn't really been told, but I don't like to take this opportunity, like in this interview now, or, for example, in the podcast, to make it the Damien Shields show and to chronicle my every moment. But there were some really interesting things that happened along the way.
You are the story's Inspector Gadget, and he is and was the star of that show. So we're going to embrace a bit of star power here for you, Damien. Okay? Go get it.
Damien is Inspector
The podcast
Gadget.
wasn't the place to do it. For me, the podcast was...
But I'll say this, like, certain people, the way they come across in audio, that visually they would just be dynamic, right? So we talk about, like,
Lawanda, yeah.
And we talk about some of these other characters, and you go, wow, if you could put them on screen, how they would come off would be even more compelling, even more persuasive, even more powerful. And so I think you've got a story here that, and we've talked about this, right? Like, the initial reaction is what it is, but there's some things that over time just sour, and other things that continue to refine themselves and grow and then continue to expand, right? And I think that this is a story that does that. And I think there are other pieces that may come together for you that did not initially, right? Like, there's some certain people who aren't on the record that may want to be on the record at some point, right?
Yeah.
And then there are other evolving elements of the story when we talk about the Cassios and the evolving narratives, stories, allegations, scope of involvement that they have, that they're almost like an octopus with many tentacles here, right? And this Faking Michael is one tentacle. Then there are 4 others here that, you know what I mean? Because we also talk about, it's not just this space over here. It's my friend Michael. It's Oprah. It's it's involvement with the children. This is a family that there is an exploration that goes beyond Faking. Faking Michael is the tip of an exploration into certain groups, including them and Jason Malachi. So I think that there's just so much more to tell here, and I think you're the one to tell it.
I think it would be a dream to be able to do it as a documentary with Jason.
Yeah. And
I tell honestly, his story.
I feel like he wants to tell his story. He just doesn't have the vehicle to tell his story.
And for him to tell his story under my scrutiny. Because you can let someone tell their story, but if no one's there to hold them accountable to what's actually true, and say, well, hang on a second.
Yeah, Damien gonna light that ass up, Jason, so don't play.
It's a come to Jesus moment, right? It is not a situation where you don't have to be held accountable. Confess your sins, and forgiveness is here for you.
Yeah, we don't want him to rewrite the history of it. We just want him to...
Rewriting history,
We just want him to say what's really true.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to tell the truth, right? We have to take accountability. We have to do the forgiveness and repentance and we got to do the whole 9 here, because no one's perfect. And I think that if given the opportunity and given the willingness to be vulnerable and truthful, people will get the human essence of the story, right? Because there's that there. We all do things that sometimes sometimes you go back and go, I didn't always have the best intention here, or I didn't do this in the best, with the best reasoning, and it was, maybe more selfish than appropriate. And sometimes you can talk yourself into thinking things are right when it's not. Like, oh, people really want to hear Michael. I can give them this. I can give them something. And it's like, yeah, it's a lie that you're giving them. But you can talk yourself into doing that, right? So I think there's more there. I absolutely think there's more there. I hope that Jason has listened to your podcast, and I hope that not just he, but I hope that people listen to it, because like you said, Damien, at the top, the goal was not just your goal was never to sell this to Michael fans. It was to sell to a broader audience. So I want you to talk about that, selling it to a broader audience. Why is it important for a broader audience to hear this? Why is that important for them to hear this story? Because someone would say, well, why would everyone else care? It's the Michael community, it's the music community. But you said there's a broader audience, your neighbor, user 1.5's clients. That's the broader audience. Why is it important for them to know this story?
Well, I think this is the biggest fraud in the history of the music business. I think there has never been anything comparable to this before. We have Milli Vanilli, which is a big scandal. It's a big scandal, but it's not a big fraud.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. This is, it's such a big deal in the scheme of the history of art forgeries, and it's Michael Jackson. But I think the reason that I would want to tell it and want to make it something that's kind of embedded in the public consciousness, like if you're walking down the street and say, what's the biggest fraud in the history of music? And I say, those fake Michael Jackson songs. Like, that would be the position I would want this to have in people's consciousness, because everyone you ask that question now would say Milli Vanilli. Everyone. You would. I mean, I don't even know what somebody would say if they didn't say Milli Vanilli, but it wouldn't be the fake Michael Jackson songs, because we haven't had that widespread listenership. It hasn't had that level of attention yet. So I think that bringing awareness to the fact that this has happened, and if this could happen to the biggest artist in the history of music, it could happen to anyone.
Yeah.
And then using that attention to then essentially act as a safeguard for other artists to not have this happen to them. Because, I mean, do other artists even know that this happened to Michael Jackson? Does Beyonce and Bruno Mars and whoever else, do they know that this happened to Michael Jackson and the way that it happened? And it wasn't just a rumor or a conspiracy theory that, someone said fake Michael Jackson songs and, yeah, that's crazy. Like, this actually happened. These people conspired. These people literally got in a room and said, we're going to make some fake Michael Jackson songs. We're going to get Jason to sing it. We're going to take samples of Michael's real voice from his old songs. We're going to splice them in. We're going to make it sound as real as possible. Then we're going to lie to Sony, lie to the estate. Hopefully they believe it. Then they'll lie to the fans. And then we're going to sell millions of copies. And everyone's going to be enriched on a fraud. That's what happened here. And if it can happen to Michael Jackson, even with his family, his kids, his fans, his collaborators, everyone saying this is fake, and it could still happen to him, then it can happen to anyone. And we don't want it to happen to anyone. We don't want it to happen to anyone ever again. But if people don't know about it, if people, like for example, if the people who did this get away with it, then it can happen to somebody else. It can easily happen to somebody else. So
what do you say to people who say, woe is me, Michael Jackson? Michael Jackson is constantly painted as a victim. He's constantly painted by certain people, by his fans, or by folks who have sympathy for his plight and the life he had to live. He's constantly being painted as a victim. And this is more aligned with the attempt to create this massive victimization of the most popular, beat down the barriers in spite of artists of all time. What do you say to folks who say the woe is me Michael train is over, and we don't want the story of Michael as the victim because we think that drum has been beat? What do you say to folks who would dismiss this as just fan sympathizers to the plight of literally the largest and most well-known artist in music history?
Well, I would say that it's not a Michael Jackson story. It's a human story. It's a story of, like you guys said, liars and thieves and con artists. It's a story of fraud.
Yeah.
And, we can't just not tell this story of fraud because there have been 1,000,001 Michael Jackson stories told before, just because he's the victim of this fraud. That's not exhausted yet. You don't say, okay, there's too many Michael Jackson stories, so you don't tell this one. This story is completely different to any other that has ever been told that connects to him, but it's not just about him. For me, it's a bigger story than just a Michael Jackson story. He's the victim, but it has more ramifications. It's bigger, and I think history needs to show that this happened. It happened to him, but it's not that we need to say, oh, this happened to Michael Jackson, so we need to talk about it. No, it happened.
Yeah.
Yes, to him, but this happened, and we need to talk about it.
And he wasn't a part of it. I think that's the big thing. Like, Michael was dead and gone at this point. So, this episode particularly is not about Michael's other endeavors in life. But a lot of things I can understand, user one's position of people saying that, because Michael was complicit in his own foolishness, right? He would put stories out there, he would do things, he would woe was me, right? But Michael wasn't even here. I'm
just playing devil's advocate. Please don't at me, y'all. I'm just playing devil's advocate. And listen, and because to what you're saying, right? Like, and to what Damien is saying, also think about like artificial intelligence when you say this could happen to anyone. Yeah. Right? You think about artists now. Artificial intelligence was not a conversation when this happened.
Yeah. And they did this without AI.
They did this without it. If you believe the podcast, which we all do, but if you believe this podcast, if you believe Faking Michael, you believe that they found a very convincing impersonator, and they spliced together real Michael vocals or ad-libs, right, and woohoos, and they created a product that could be convincingly sold to the public. Imagine what that means in the age of technology, when we can literally sit here and in 30 minutes create a whole dialogue with someone that sounds like Morgan Freeman and an artificial intelligence technology that sounds like Angelina Jolie. We could do that right now, and they could be having a whole conversation. So when you say this could happen to anybody, I think the conversation, we have to keep developing what that means, right? And I think you are making a very poignant point here, right? Because what if this happens to a Beyonce, or to a Sabrina Carpenter, or to a Bruno Mars, or whomever you want to insert in that your favorite artist, right? Can this happen to them, right, in a much more convincing way?
The answer is yes. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead
and the answer maybe is probably yes. And so what does this story tell us, and what does it warn us for, and how do we then take action to create protections for artists, right, which is what Michael was talking about in his life. I think you're talking about a bigger story. Yeah.
I was going to say, I actually have one more question personally for Damien before we turn it over to our Patreon questions, and then we ain't gonna hold you much longer, okay? But so my last question for you about your podcast, because we didn't even get into a lot of things, is so much information in this podcast. I highly recommend you going to listen to it right now. If you have not listened to it already, what the hell are you doing? Go listen to Faking Michael. But my last question for you, Damien, is this: if you could say anything to your list of villains, Branca, Port, Jason Malachi, the Cassios, if you could say anything to them right now in this moment, what would it be?
Just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. I mean, it's happened. We know that it's happened. Just the only thing left is for you to put your pride aside and say, you know what, we all fucked up. Everybody fucked up. And we can all move on. Once you admit that, we all fucked up. That's it. And they say, yep, you did, and such is life.
Such is life. Just tell the truth, guys.
And give me my $11.88 back, or $13.88, whatever it was.
I got $12 for you right now. You want me to cash app it to you?
Yes. I'll settle with you.
Oh my God! All right.
No, I think he's right. Right, like the truth can make you free, folks. I think the truth is needed here.
It's
there are
so
a lot of people that
easier.
Well, I mean, it's not easy, right? But a lot of people suffer under the lie.
Lying.
No, some people sleep really well at night being. No, a lot of people sleep well at night being the devil. But a lot of people have suffered. A lot of people have suffered under this lie. When I think about Terrell and the story you tell in Faking Michael about the things Terrell lost pursuing the truth, LaWanda, the things she lost pursuing the truth, people suffer under these lies, the weight of the lies, and then others go out and buy Bugattis.
They have lavish weddings with,
They get hair plugs and new teeth. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's what happens, and people suffer under the fraud. So there's that. But we've got some questions from our Patreon.
Yes.
Folks want to know.
Okay.
And they want to ask Damien. So Damien's going to be...
This is the Ask Damien portion of the podcast.
He's going to be honest and truthful and forthright.
All right, so we've got our first question is from JB. What up, girl? This was truly an excellent, high-quality production. One of my favorite parts of the Faking Michael series is the immersiveness of the episodes. For example, when retelling your first meetup with Terrell in LA, the usage of airport background noise or the noise of the Starbucks where you were was just really interesting, an interesting design touch. So shout out to your production team for that. Fantastic. I agree with her. It was fantastic. I truly felt like you were able to paint a picture in my mind and made the experience even better than what it already was. The sound design throughout was just great. Excellent job. As a Gen Z fan, I was probably 4 or 5 when all of this occurred. She's just a wee lass, okay? Hearing the entire controversy unfold step by step, including all of the context and perspectives, was really helpful for me and is giving me a new perspective regarding the Casio tapes. I have truly been informed a ton, so thanks so much for an awesome production and experience, Damien. So it wasn't really a question, but just a good job.
Thanks. Well, I can actually add to what she said there.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it was painting a picture in her mind of when listening, and that was the actual mandate that I gave the producer, Dan Villalobos. I said, if we're going to do this, it needs to be done properly and to like the highest degree we can do it. And the mandate was the movie for people's minds. I want people to be able to feel like they are there when these things are happening. And it was really important for me to do our best in every situation that we could, whether it was like Terrell talking about how he's just finished playing baseball and he gets a panic phone call from Lawanda, and him and Corey jump in the car and race down to the studio. So you have the crack of the baseball, you have the phone call coming through, he's telling the story, and all of a sudden their car doors are slamming, the ignition's on, and the tires are screeching down the road. That kind of stuff was really important to me, and I wanted to make the movie for people's minds. But I was also mindful of not doing it too much. Like, I think we did use a fair bit of the ambient sound to create that feeling, but it was done in more of a Hollywood way. None of those sounds were in the actual moment that they occurred. Like, Terrell wasn't recording his tires screeching or the baseball game, right? And when I was walking into Starbucks to meet with Terrell, I wasn't recording the ground crunching under my feet and the opening of the door and the coffee's getting brewed. That was all designed by Dan Villalobos. He created all of that stuff using his own authentic original recordings. So if he needed a car door slamming, he would go and slam the car door. If he needed keys, or, you know, I was driving around in my car with my iPhone out the window recording what it sounds like to drive, you know, or mounting it on the dash of my car and like just going and putting my indicator on and taking a turn and, you know, having a car pull up next to me. So it would be authentic. We recreated it all. None of it was from the moment. But there's also a really important balance to strike, because I love true crime podcasts, but some true crime podcasts, I think, overuse that technique. Like, a lot of people, like, every single interview that they do, you know, if there's 3 interviews in this episode, we're going to get the car pulling up, we're going to get the brake getting pulled, we're going to get the keys, and we're going to get the footsteps and the door slamming on every single interview you have ever done. And at the end of the series, you've had like 30 different experiences of footsteps and car doors. And like, I thought it was important to, because it wasn't authentic, it wasn't actually the real moment, we couldn't just keep forcing those things. It was more of like a movie. So yeah,
it definitely was a movie. I mean, I think most people listen to podcasts so that they can create pictures on their own. You know, when you're watching a film or a television show, you get the pictures that they want you to see, right?
Yeah.
When you are listening to something, you can create the moments in your mind. I think I told you before we started rolling, I was like, I looked at a picture of Jason Malachi and he was nothing like I had pictured in my mind, because my mind conjured up one image and that's actually not what he looks like, but that's how well you tell the story, that I had a character formed in my mind from Faking Michael. So, I mean, JB, thank you for your comment.
Yes,
now
thank
we
you very
know
much.
how.
Thank you for the kind words.
Yes. Now we know how what do they say? How the something was made, the cake was made. I don't know.
How the sausage. Sausage. How the sausage was made. Yeah,
so,
you know what I wanted to say this.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Damien. Yeah.
Thank you for the kind words, and credit to Dan Villalobos.
Yes, thank you, Dan.
Your compliment is all his.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, I thought that was like, so I love that. I love the visualization, the sound visualizations in podcasts. I love it.
Yeah, I love a good pod.
Because I have a vivid imagination. I dream in color. So I'm seeing it all as the sound is playing. Oh, yeah. It's all coming out. And I know who you saw. You saw Jason as Michael, impersonator in a wig. You probably saw him.
Didn't.
Yes, you did.
I did.
You probably
not.
saw him as one of them impersonators. One of the three
What
Michaels.
I'm not finna do. Go back and forth with you on what Jason looked like in my head.
Or you probably.
You wish you were up here.
Or you might have saw him as something we seen in L.A. on the streets.
Now that's close.
Shout out to all the LA impersonators
out there.
in Hollywood, baby. Okay, go ahead.
Our next Patreon comment comes from OG Tara. What up, girl? She's over there in Great Britain. I think she's in London, but hey, girl, hey. All right, so OG Tara says, amazing podcast, Damien and the wider team. In your personal opinion, do you think the estate knowingly bought fake tracks, or they were in too deep when they realized?
In too deep before they realized, to their own detriment, I would say. That's from what we can analyze, the evidence we can analyze that's in the podcast and what we know for sure, that's what I would say. We can theorize all day long, and I don't particularly like to theorize. I say I'm not here for theories, I'm here for facts, I'm here for evidence, I'm here for the truth, what we can prove. And so from what we can see, it definitely seems like they were in too deep before they realized. Or at least they felt they were. Because in my opinion, I still don't think they were in too deep before it was too late, but then they made choices, and I wouldn't have made the same choices. But, they probably had a roundtable discussion with the lawyers and the people, and can we get away with this? Should we move forward? Is it too late? And they obviously made their choice. But, yeah, I don't think that they heard the songs on day one and thought, yeah, these are fake, but let's say they're real. I think it was thinking that they're real, and then Terrell and Teddy and LaWanda and Michael Prince are all raising questions, they're having problems, and then they decided, let's not go down that route, let's just say they're real. Yeah.
Yeah. And so something came up as you were talking. So earlier in the podcast, in Faking Michael, you were actually talking about how, like, they released breaking news to kind of silence some of the people that were saying these aren't Michael's tracks, or right? So the buzz
like a
was
litmus
already...
test. What will people actually say?
The buzz was already kind of out there before they released breaking news. So I agree with you. I think they were in too deep, but they definitely had an off-ramp that they chose not to use. Because once they put the song out and they got the reaction that they got from the fans, they should have said, you know what, maybe save these for the next project, or like, let's just not put this on this project. And they went forward, and that was their choice. So
and let's not forget, we would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling kids.
Oh my God.
Shout out to Scooby-Doo.
Oh my God.
And the mystery crew. Damien Shields and the mystery crew.
We've got two more questions. They are both from MJ Fangirl, who is our good sis. Hey, Aisha, we love you, girl. So MJ Fangirl said, really well done and super great production. Kudos to you for all of the research put in. I learned a lot. Have you had any feedback after the release from Jackson family members who were featured in the podcast?
Thank you for the kind words. No, I have not heard from any Jackson family member about anything. Yep.
Have you heard from the estate or anyone connected to the estate?
I have not received any feedback. No.
Nothing.
Sony, the estate, and Jackson family, nothing from anyone.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yep.
All right.
I was curious as to, what people would say, whether it be, people being upset about it, or if I would get blowback from the estate or Sony. But I think the thing is that they've done this. This is what's happened. I'm just telling it.
You're just telling the story.
Do you think time has something to do with that too? Just the timing. Right? The album came out in 2010. Faking Michael comes out in 2024. So we're talking about a nice bit of time. So do you think time has something to do with the lack of? I mean, so there. Like you said, you don't like to speculate. Speculation, as Ashley would say. You can speculate, right? Like, people don't want to revisit certain things, or there are bigger fish maybe on the fire to cook up. You know what I mean? Like, so
I think there's a few of those things together.
Yeah, like, I don't think it has anything to do with the quality of the story so much as I think timing has a lot to do with this. That's why I think it's a slow burn story. I think it grows. It's a fire that grows because it takes time to put it together. Like you talked about at the top of this, some people not being willing to talk to you, and it taking time for them to be willing to talk to you. How many good stories have we seen about celebrities that take a lot of time before you can tell them? I think this is in that vein, right? Time gives people more freedom, less fear to do things. And I think this may be a part of that. You're still talking about $1 billion empire. And a lot of things can happen to you that, negatively impact you if you try to penetrate or pop a bubble in that $1 billion empire. So I think that there are multiple factors as to why maybe you haven't heard things. Not to mention some of the heroes you mentioned, 3T, they've had just such a a very challenging time, right? Even in the time that your podcast came out, with their father, with Tito Jackson passing away and these other things. So, there's so many different variables that kind of impact the impact. And I think that's something to kind of keep in mind as you kind of look towards the, what came of it,
Yeah. So when it comes to like the heroes and like the 3T, the Jackson family, I'm not looking for thanks. So I don't need them to reach out and say, good job, thank you, whatever. I don't need that. And with the estate and Sony and that side of things, I made this in a way where I was expecting that they wouldn't have any blowback either. Like, I really tried to be as professional and respectful in every aspect of it. Like, you can't deny what happened, but you can tell it in a way that doesn't kind of... I'm not trying to stir something new up. This is an old story. This is an old story that was never told. I'm not trying to create a whole new saga and a whole new set of fury from people to go and, chase John Branca down the street with pitchforks. I'm not trying to do that. This is just a story, and I'm just saying what happened. And actually, I do wonder whether or not they may have seen this, had come out and thought, well, we're never going to talk about this. We don't want to acknowledge this, but, if this is the closure that fans need to move on, he's told the story. Like, that's what happened. Like, we don't need to go out there and confirm or deny it. It's out there, and, it might even serve them a benefit that, someone went out and told their dirty laundry, but they're happy that it was done. Like, it's possible that they're just like, okay, that chapter is now closed. We've never had to answer it, but it's been told for us. I think there's a saying: tell the truth, or someone else will tell the truth for you.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So that's kind of what happened here. They didn't want to ever tell the truth, but someone else told it for them.
Someone else told it.
And they didn't bite back. They didn't say anything. So
yeah. All right. Last question from MJ Fangirl, and then we are going to wrap. I hate to wrap this episode with Damien because we love talking to you. Okay, so last question, MJ Fangirl says, what has surprised you the most about the feedback and the reception from fans who listen to the podcast?
What has surprised me about the reception and the feedback? I've had some negative feedback, which I wouldn't say it was a surprise, but I was maybe hoping that people would understand why I made certain choices that I made, but it seems that a lot of people haven't really understood why. And it's the repetition of certain facts and certain clips. And I guess this is an opportunity to talk about that because I have received a lot of comments about it. This episode I heard the same clip 10 times. At some point I knew what was going to happen because he always repeats that clip. But the thing is that fans are familiar with this saga. I didn't make the podcast for fans. I made it for the general public. And it's 13 episodes, which most people are not going to listen to consecutively for 13 hours. Most people don't have time to sit for 13 hours and listen to all 13 episodes of a podcast in one sitting. They'll listen on their commute to work, and then they'll go about their day, and they'll have 10 hours of dealing with life, and then maybe they'll forget to listen on the way home. Maybe 3 days later, they'll pick it back up. And most people, it takes time to go through a story like this. And especially people who aren't familiar with the characters, aren't familiar with the narrative, aren't familiar with the facts. I felt that if people are going to be picking this up in their spare time and eventually getting through the 13 episodes, the repetition was really important because it would remind people what they heard a week ago when they last listened to it. It's not fresh, and it's the first time they're hearing it. And I understand that some people, they know Teddy Riley, and they know some of the things Teddy has said about this. And if I tell you what Teddy said 5 times over the course of 13 episodes, the 5th time you're going to be like, okay, I heard this 4 times already before. Do I need to hear it again? And as the fans, because they're so astute and they're so studied and they know a lot of the stuff that was already out there, yeah, they don't want to hear it 5 times. But I did that for the general public so that my neighbor could come and bang on my door, having never heard of Eddie Casio and having never heard of fake songs and having never heard of, wouldn't even know what an estate was prior to this, to be able to come and put all the dots together and know the characters' names and know the facts and have enough ability to recall what had gone on to then rant freely. She knew the story because she'd had I think the repetition is important for that. So, I did get a lot of feedback about the repetition, but there was a reason, and there was there was a lot of conversation behind the scenes. Like we had a lot of kind of test listenings, giving this podcast before it was released to this group of people and then that group of people. I give it to people who don't have any understanding about anything to do with Michael Jackson who've never heard of fake Michael Jackson songs. We tested it with them. We tested it with hardcore fans, and hardcore fans behind the scenes would always kind of say, like, you know, I already know that, do we need to have that in there? And then the other people would say, oh my god, the explanation of this was so good because I had no idea about that. Like, the fans would say, oh, we already know what an estate is, why do you need to explain what an estate is? But the non-fans would say, I'm so glad you explained what an estate is, because we've never had a family member pass away with extreme wealth that would need to be an estate. We didn't know what an estate was. So, yeah, the choices that I made in general were for the general public listeners. So I'm sorry to the fans if you really had to get through that same clip of Michael Prince or Teddy Riley or whoever it was over and over and over again. But, yeah, there was a reason. So,
yeah,
that was...
I mean, I like the repetition, but I was one of those people that didn't listen to it straight through. I listened to a couple of episodes, like I listened to it on my way to work. I have a 30-minute drive to work, 30-minute drive home. I listened to it on a flight, you know, like, and I listened to, you know, that between the music I was listening to. So it actually helped me because I'm like, oh, well, it's been a week, 2 weeks, a month since I listened to this podcast, but I can understand it was very repetitive, but for me that was helpful because I'm like, I don't remember what we talked about last time. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate that you can take the feedback and just say, like, I hear you and this is the reason why. And that is kind of surprising, but Michael fans are, again, we've been swirling around in this ditch for a long time. You know what I mean? So we already know, you know, what mud is over here, what mud is over here, what mud we're standing in. And the general pop, I call it general pop, but general public does not know.
It's prison.
I guess, and on the flip side of that, the creative choice to not have that level of repetition, the risk would have been people would have ended up being confused. Like if you stop reintroducing a character and saying who they are and who is speaking, I mean, it just becomes a mishmash. And I've listened to some podcasts over time where they don't remind you of things and they expect you to kind of have a whiteboard there with a name and a person and a picture and connecting the dots and the strings and you know what's going on. But I figured, like, I didn't want to run the risk that the dots wouldn't connect for people automatically, so I've connected them for them. And you know, we make choices.
A creative choice.
It's a choice I made.
Choice. Yeah. And I mean, and you had a reason for making it, right? So it wasn't just made in a vacuum. So shout out to everybody on the Patreon who submitted questions. If you submitted your question too late, it's not getting read. So there's that. You know, we have to have some rules here and we have to adhere to them. But I have a question. If you had to looking back on this whole experience, what's something that you wish you had done that you didn't do, or something that you did do that you wish you hadn't done?
I know exactly how I would do the podcast if I did it again. I would have done it in far fewer episodes with a far more condensed storytelling. But the thing is that as I was producing it, it was unfolding for me the way I was writing it and making it. And at some point it became too late to turn back. Like, it really did, because it wasn't just me making it. I was relying entirely on Dan Villalobos to bring the whole thing to fruition. And if I would have said to him 8 episodes in, you know what, we're heading towards 13 episodes here. It's too many. Let's redo the whole thing and we'll do it so we can get it done in 7. He would have had a heart attack and I would have had to...
Poor Dan. We don't want to kill Dan.
No, his funeral, he would have had a funeral and yeah. So if I could do it again, I would try and shift the facts around in an order that allowed me to do it in a more linear thing, because the way we did it was from the fans' perspective to create the picture of the way we experienced it, which creates the reason we actually investigated this. So the first 2 episodes are how did this happen from the general public's perspective without knowing what went on behind the scenes. There's no investigative element to the first 2 episodes. It's just whatever we can consume, whatever comes to us through the media, through the fan forums, through our discussions and our feelings, and that sets the scene for what then starts in episode 3 with, okay, so I'm going to get on a plane, I'm going to go to LA, I'm going to meet the Jacksons, and I'm going to really figure this thing out. If I could do it again, I may actually put Terrell up front as episode 1 and forget about... I might condense episode 1 and 2 to 10 minutes and then go straight into Terrell and talk about it in a linear storyline and have the fans reacting to all of the drama and everything that happened and unfolded from episode 2 after it all blows up. And it only blows up once rather than doing it 3 times over, because we did it 3 times. We went through the storyline from fans, then we did it from the Jackson family, Sony, and the estate, and the producers that worked on the album, and then we did it a 3rd time from the perspective of how does this come together from Eddie Cascio and James Port and Jason Malachi's perspective. So that's another reason it probably felt repetitious, was because we peeled back the layers from multiple perspectives and we gave them all their designated episodes to really have their moment to see it through their lens. And that was, I like that we did it like that. I'm not unhappy with the podcast at all. I'm very proud of it. I'm very happy with it. But I think that if I could do it again, I would probably do it in a more straight line, so that when that breaking news finally goes public and we all react and go mental about it, you've built up to that fact, like you've seen what's going on behind the scenes and you're like, you're damn right you reacted like that, because everybody else said it was, Terrell said it was fake, and then the Jacksons are saying it's fake, and everyone's saying it's fake, and then oh shit, and then the fans said it was fake. I got hands going everywhere here. But yeah, that's what I would do. I'd make it
So you would go in reverse, basically.
I'd put the fan reaction at the end.
At the end, yeah.
Yeah.
Or not at the very end, but at the climax of hearing that for the first time. Hearing it for the first time publicly would happen after all of the behind-the-scenes nonsense unfolded. Yeah. Because at the beginning, it's kind of like, okay, we all reacted, but like, why?
Yeah.
Like, because Damien Shields thinks it doesn't sound like Michael Jackson, and that's
all
a big
the
deal.
fans think it doesn't sound like Michael Jackson. Yeah, there's more.
Yeah, so that's how I would change it. And I would try and keep it to like 7 episodes, because I think you could do it that way. I think it could be a really powerful, compelling, more fast listen if you just didn't go through everyone's perspective. And you could still put their perspective in it, but it doesn't have to, you don't have to have separate little like Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3.
Yeah.
And the evidence that comes at the end, because we have 3 separate evidence episodes at the end. We have connoisseurship, we have provenance, and we have forensics,
yeah.
You don't necessarily need to separate those 3 things if you just weave all of that evidence into the narrative.
Yeah.
You don't need to have separate standalone episodes for each of those things if it's all understood as part of the narrative that unfolds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I don't know. You could do it different ways. You could do it a million different ways. You could not do it at all. Who knows?
Well,
you could save 14 years.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the part, right? Like, we didn't even kind of hit on that 14 years of dedication to this story. I mean, was it worth it?
Of course. It's done. It's done.
We're here now.
Done. If I didn't do it, it wouldn't be done.
Did you feel like you birthed your baby?
Yeah, not the way I wanted to though. Like I'm happy it's done. Yeah, it was worth it 100%. I wouldn't take it back, but I think it's still
there's more here. Yeah, I think there's more here.
I mean, why aren't the criminals in jail? That's the big question, isn't it?
Well, Damien, we didn't talk about jail. We didn't talk about nobody going to jail.
Some people need to go to prison for this. It's like,
and that might be the next move. That might be, faking Michael the aftermath. I don't know.
I don't think it's possible. I don't think that that's ever going to happen. I think they've got away with it.
No, it's just slippery enough to where that's not, I think, a real question.
Yeah,
but
I think they've gotten away with it.
A wonderful story, a very tragic story, but it tells the story of what you call the greatest art fraud in history, right? And what is modern history? It makes me think of how so many, not just music artists, you talk about actors, actresses. We just were talking about, I was telling my sister about an actress named Donna Drake, who was passing in Hollywood. She was a black actress, passing as Mexican, French, German heritage actress, right? And it made me think about your podcast, because the depth she took of other cultures, expressions and ethnicity, and she also actually learned Spanish fluently to help cover this fraud. It made me think about Faking Michael. These things happen, especially in entertainment, and the story that went behind her, right? That was cooked up by the studio. That was a total lie, right? To sell this fraud. It's a fraud, right? And it's a fraud, created in furtherance of art, right? So what they're calling art. It happens in so many different places, right? Michael Jackson being this huge, huge story in music. It needed to be said. It needed to be told. You tell the truth and you shame the devil. From where we're from, that's what you do. And I think Damien Shields has done just that. Using 1.5, give us our final thoughts here, and let's wrap this thing up.
Well, first, I just want to say, Damien, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and talking about Faking Michael, a fantastic podcast. I have a little note in my notes at the end. I wrote, this podcast has everything: betrayal, intimidation, lies, black market sales of unreleased tracks, mental and emotional trauma. I mean, it literally has everything in it, and it's all narrated by the lovely voice of Damien Shields. So we are so excited that you spent some time.
If you weren't sick of me after 13 episodes, you're sick of me after 2.5 hours of Black Jackson Estate.
In my ears. I said, that's my baby in my ears. That's Damien.
It was just so refreshing listening to your voice going to work every day. So I actually want to end, though. There's a quote in the podcast that I want to end this podcast with, because I think it really sums up everything and how we feel. It's actually a quote by Darren Hayes, he's the lead singer of
Savage Garden.
Savage Garden, that's right. I know one Savage Garden song, exactly one, but I know all the words, so I'm proud of myself. But what he says in this podcast really, in my opinion, sums up everything about Faking Michael. He says, the other thing that upsets me about the whole thing is just the blatant disrespect and disregard for the fans in general. If a fan has the ability to identify themselves with Michael Jackson, it's because they are tuning into a frequency. And if you then change the frequency, but put Michael Jackson's name on there and say that it's still Michael Jackson, then you are ignorant to what it is that this man did. In releasing this music without considering how passionate and how informed Michael Jackson's fans were, I felt like it was a very telling act, because we are the caretakers of Michael Jackson's legacy. I feel very strongly about that, about Michael, because who else is going to do this and defend him other than the fans? And on that note, Damien, I want to give you the last word about Faking Michael.
I don't know what to say. I think it's all in the podcast. I'd prefer not to say anything and just say go and listen to it, and I hope you enjoy it.
And before we go, where can we find Damien Shields? Where do they need to go to follow him and listen to this podcast? Obviously, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Okay, so if you want to contact me and interact with me, Twitter or X is probably the place that I'm at. So that's just at Damien Shields. I do have an Instagram account, but I very scarcely use it for anything other than comedy content, as you guys would know. If you want to order the book that I wrote, it's called Michael Jackson Songs and Stories from the Vault. It's published on Amazon, so you can order it online there. There's a physical version and a digital version. And if you want to check out the other podcast that I produced, which is the Genesis of Thriller, that's on all the normal podcast apps: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all those places.
We are always thankful to have Damien on the show. We'll bring him back for some work, maybe another 12 days. Some more commentary. Damien, thank you so much. It's been so insightful to kind of get inside your mind and understand what you were thinking about, what your goals were here for this podcast. I think you've just done something excellent that is going to continue to ripen over time. And honestly, when I first started listening to this, I thought about the James Brown story, which is yet to be told as well. There are stories that have yet to be told about art theft and how artists are absolutely conned and killed and criminalized and stolen from by very powerful forces and entities. And Michael talked about it, and there's so many other stories to be told. Thank you for telling this story, because I'm sure it is going to embolden someone else to tell another story that should be told from the annals of history. Thank you so much, Damien Shields, user 1.5. Your final thoughts.
All right. Well, that is it for this episode of the Black Jackson Estate podcast. We thank you again, Damien, for joining us today, and we will see you guys on the next episode of the Black Jackson Estate.
Thank you.